Vertical readings in Dante's comedy. I'd like to thank the Master and Fellows of Trinity College for hosting and the Department of Italian for sponsoring this first year of vertical readings. It is my very great pleasure today to introduce Dr. Vittorio Montemaggi, who is an assistant professor of religion and literature in the Department of Romance Languages and Literatures, and also concurrent assistant professor in the Department of Theology at Notre Dame. And Vittorio has his BA, his MPhil, and his PhD from the University of Cambridge, so it's always a pleasure to welcome him back. And indeed, we've had the pleasure of having Vittorio here for this entire term, so he's been with us throughout the beginning of this initiative, this project. Professor Montemaggi's interests include the relationship between literary and theological reflection, and his work has focused on relationships between the comedy and Primo Levi, Roberto Benigni, Shakespeare, Dostoevsky, Augustine, Aquinas, just minor figures like that. And his recent publications include a co-edited volume with Matthew Treherne, who did a brilliant lecture on the twos that many of you will recall. Their volume is Dante's Commedia Theology as Poetry, which is published in 2010 from University of Notre Dame Press. Just two announcements before we allow Vittorio to begin. First of which is that we are videotaping this lecture as the camera is pointed at Vittorio, so none of you should appear in person, but just so you know that, we have to make this announcement. Also, we very much hope that you will join us next term for the continuation of these vertical readings. On the 31st of January, Professor John Marenbaum, who's Professor of Philosophy here at Cambridge, will be speaking on the fours. And we will be in touch with dates as this all moves forward. So thank you very much, Vittorio.
Thank you. Just let me know if you can't hear. But is it all right if I speak? Thank you. Excellent. So the first image that came to mind when I received the invitation from Heather and George to prepare a vertical reading for their wonderful project was that of a handstand. Indeed, in Italian, fare la verticale means to perform a handstand. And you'll be glad to hear I won't be attempting such acrobatic gesture tonight. But if I were able to give this lecture standing upside down, I would be able to communicate to you, no doubt more successfully than I could ever do merely by speaking, a few crucial aspects of what I think is at stake in our vertical reading of the threes this evening. First of all, if I were able to perform a handstand, I imagine I would be able very directly and compellingly to generate surprise, excitement, and suspense. And these, I think, would be very appropriate states of being for engaging with the challenge and journey that Heather and George have set before us in proposing a vertical reading of the whole of the Commedia. Their invitation to this four-year project is as surprising as it is welcome. Something that is both novel and striking and much needed. And it is exciting because, as both George and Heather's lecture and then Matthew's have already shown, this new mode of systematically journeying through Dante's text is set to open for us genuinely fresh and fruitful perspectives on the Commedia. And finally, a sense of suspense. Is that the right pronunciation in English? Suspense? 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 Suspense. And finally, a sense of suspense. Because as surprising and exciting as the journey we're undertaking is, we're yet to discover where exactly it will lead, or how our relationship with the Commedia will be transformed by this four-year adventure. Furthermore, were I able to give this lecture while performing a handstand, I would also quite directly and compellingly be able to raise the question of verticality itself. And this would be very appropriate for discussing the threes, because as we shall see, these are cantos that, especially if read in the light of Paradiso 3, importantly invite us to think about the question of verticality itself and of its theological implications. More generally speaking, my giving this lecture while performing a handstand could also convey, quite directly and compellingly, the fact that in significant measure, the vertical reading we're embarking upon this evening is about the subversion of expectation. Indeed, that of the subversion of expectation is one of the dominant themes of our cantos, which are all, in one way or another, cantos that foreground the need for expectations and assumptions to be modified so as to be able to progress on our journey towards God. This is true both of the pilgrim, Dante himself, and of what the text demands of us, readers of Dante's poem. In fact, this evening I will be intentionally blurring the distinction between the two. I am conscious of the possible limitations that such interpretive way of proceeding might have, and I would look forward to addressing these together in discussion after the lecture, should you wish to do so. But I'd like to proceed in this way, in the attempt of conveying all the more immediately the sense of journeying and of transformation that is a fundamental aspect of Dante's project, and thereby also as a way of conveying all the more immediately a sense of active journeying on our part as we continue along the 4-year vertical reading project. Not that we have necessarily to agree with the particular theological framework presented to us by Dante as the form that our transformation might take. But I do think we are missing a vital aspect of Dante's text if we don't give ourselves opportunities to engage with it with a sense of the transformative impact it might have on our aesthetic, intellectual, ethical, and perhaps even theological sensibilities. In this vein, I will be ending the lecture today by playing a short piece of music that was written almost 7 centuries after the Commedia and that bears only an indirect connection to Dante's text. But I think that it beautifully embodies some of the ideas we will be talking about. I will say more about the particular piece of music later. At present, allow me simply to say that, in the absence of my handstand, I hope that opting in this way for an audio rather than visual accompaniment to the lecture and to the text on the screen will contribute to sharpening your sense that a vertical journey through Dante's Commedia is not simply a detached mental venture, but importantly an embodied one as well. And allow me here to express specific debts of gratitude towards Heather and George. To Heather for illuminating an ongoing conversation on the importance of posture and of the interplay between the individual and the communal in Dante's narrative, and to George, as well as to Professor John Marrenborn, for illuminating conversations on the relationship between reading the Commedia and listening to music, especially music that is not directly connected to Dante's poem. I would also like to express a radical debt to Robin Kirkpatrick, whose translation of the Commedia you'll see will be accompanying us on our reading this evening. On a scholarly level, Robin's commentary to the Commedia that accompanies this translation is the deepest available reflection on the theological dynamics of Dante's understanding of personhood and freedom, two of our themes this evening. On a personal level, it is with Robin that I first learned to appreciate just how transformative Dante's text can be, and I certainly would not be here speaking about Dante were it not for the inspiration provided by Robin. So, as you can see from my title, the overarching theme I have chosen for my vertical reading is indeed freedom. It is in and through the question of freedom that questions of verticality and the reorientation of expectation are focused on in our cantos. What this means, as we will see, is that these cantos focus on questions of personhood, particularity, and hope. Indeed, if we take our cantos in their narrative order, we immediately find a rather stark statement concerning hope, and what appears to be the ultimate lack of freedom. Per me si va nella città dolente, per me si va nell'eterno dolore, per me si va tra la perduta gente. Giustizia mosse il mio alto fattore, fecemi la divina podestate, la somma sapienza e il primo amore. Dinanzi a me non fuor cose create se non eterne, e io eterna duro. Lasciatemi speranza, voi che entrate. Not the most, for the beginning of a lecture, these are not necessarily the most, anyway. But entering hell, we are told, requires the abandonment of hope. This would seem to make sense, especially as it might be seen to conform to assumptions we might have of hell as the place that, by definition, is without freedom. There is no hope because there is no freedom. To be in hell on this view is to be deprived of freedom as a result of our shortcomings. The ultimate imposition of divine authority on the recalcitrant human self, the self which in its freedom decides not to follow the divine word. If these are the expectations we are bringing with us upon entering Dante's hell, however, we need to be ready to revise them. This is already suggested by the fact that we are told that hell is the creation not only of justice, power, and wisdom, but also of love. This, as Dennis Turner has recently pointed out, in one of the sharpest and most compelling analyses available of the theology of the Inferno, reveals the condition of hell to be an unfolding of, rather than an imposition on, the freedom of its inhabitants. As Turner puts it, and I quote at length, Dante's hell is a place where sinners, by choice, inhabit their sins and live their lives structured by sin's distorted perceptions of love. That love they have to reject as being an invasion of some imagined personal space independent of God, as a violation of their personal freedom and autonomy. But the self-deceit, self-affirmation, shows up in the refusal of the damned to accept that there can be any narrative other than their own, for they deny that there is, after all, any Divina Commedia. The damned all have their own stories to tell, and Inferno tells them. Each of them, from Francesca da Rimini to Ugolino, know that those stories which they each tell of their fates recount not just why they were sent there to hell in the first place, that is their specific sin, but also why they are held there without term in a condition of sinfulness. For the grip of hell on them is but the grip with which they hold on to their stories, without which they cannot imagine for themselves an identity or reality. They need their stories, stories of their own telling, and they need the misrepresentations that those stories tell. Hell is but the condition consequent upon their ultimate refusal to abandon that need. Hell, then, is the condition not of those who have sinned, for many who have sinned more grievously than Francesca and Paolo are not in hell, but in a place of redemption. In purgatory, hell is the condition of those who do not repent of their stories, who refuse the offer of their revision by the divine love, and insist on living by means of the story that sin tells, the story of the attempt to achieve a self-made significance independently of the story of the divine love. End quote. So hell, on this view, is not the antithesis of freedom, but the result of confusion of freedom with choice, and of the pursuit of freedom as autonomy, a pursuit of freedom that, through individualistic self-centeredness, entraps the self in its own limitation. A limitation necessarily deriving from the self's not being self-sufficient, but radically dependent on divine love as the very substance of its being. As we shall see, it is this very limitation that in the Purgatorio and the Paradiso will be represented as the genuine foundation of freedom and identity. But let us remain with Inferno 3 a little while longer. Immediately after entering the gates of hell, which we should note are in fact open, unlike the ones that later will have to be opened for Dante and Virgil by a divine messenger, Dante meets the first group of human beings on his journey. And indeed, the third canto of each cantica is the canto in which Dante meets the first group of human beings already inhabiting the realm of the afterlife he is visiting. In Inferno 3, he becomes aware of their presence through horrific and cacophonous sounds, an aspect of Dante's text that I'd like you to keep in mind as we proceed, given that, as we shall see, Paradiso 3, the last canto in our vertical journey, ends in song. So this is what Dante hears upon entering the gates of hell. Quivi sospiri, pianti alti guai, risonavan per l'aere senza stelle, perch'io al cominciare ne lagrimai. Diverse lingue, orribili favelle, parole di dolore, accenti d'ira, voci alte e fioche, suon di manconelle, facevano un tumulto il qual s'aggira sempre in quell'aura senza tempo tinta, come l'arena quando turbo spira. On hearing this noise, Dante asks Virgil as to its source. And here we should note that Dante calls Virgil maestro, emphasizing his role as guiding teacher. This is important, although Dante refers to Virgil as maestro a number of times in the poem. In Inferno 3, each of the 4 times that Dante directly addresses Virgil in this canto, he begins in the same way, maestro. This emphasis on the question of guiding authority and on the pilgrim's need for guidance on his journey is important for our vertical reading, because in our other cantos too, we will see Dante being challenged to grow in and through having to negotiate different modes of perception and different ways of relating to those offering him guidance. Virgil responds to Dante's question by explaining to him that the first group they meet on their way is that of the ignami, the indifferent, the crowd of those who failed to make any mark on the world or on their own selves. Those who in effect are without identity. They frantically and goallessly follow a blank banner, and they have no proper place either in heaven or hell. As Virgil says, they're envious of every other otherworldly condition, and ultimately are not worthy of our consideration. Questi non hanno speranza di morte e la loro cieca vita è tanto bassa che invidiosi sono d'ogni altra sorte. Fama di loro il mondo esser non lassa, misericordia e giustizia li sdegna. Non ragioniamo di loro, ma guarda e passa. In fact, Dante does recognize some of them, most famously colui che fece il gran rifiuto. Poscia ch'io vebbi alcun riconosciuto, vidi e conobbi l'ombra di colui che fece per viltà il gran rifiuto. Much has been said about how we might identify who this person actually is, the two most likely contenders being Pontius Pilate or Pope Celestine V. But in a sense, the most important thing about Dante's way of telling us he identified someone is that this identification amounts to no identification at all, amounting more to a general definition of the ignani, those who refuse to make anything of themselves, those who reject the divine gift of free will and the possibility of individual particularity and identity. As they move forward on their journey, Dante and Virgil next see those who do not fall in the rather numerous group of the indifferent. And this is a privileged moment for reflection on the theological dynamics of Dante's Inferno. For what we are told about this second group that Dante meets in Inferno 3 applies also to all those Dante will meet in hell later. And what is most significant of this description, in light of our theme this evening, is that these human beings move towards their infernal abode of their own accord. So the second group Dante meets is the group of all those other human beings who arrive in hell, and they're not with the Ignani. So these are the human beings that will populate hell, and those who populate hell when Dante visits hell have passed as part, the river, as part of the group that Dante now sees. So this is why I'm suggesting that it's a very important moment, because what Dante tells us about this group he meets can apply generally to all the souls he meets in hell. And so Dante sees this group and hears this group swearing and cursing God for the day they were born. And some of them are proceeding more slowly than required. But they all move forward, spurred by divine justice, acting within them in such a way as to turn their fear into desire. As Virgil says, quelli che muoiono nell'ira di Dio, tutti convengono qui d'ogni paese, e pronti sono a trapassar l'orio, che la divina giustizia li sprona, sicché la tema si volve in disio. We might be tempted here to think that the divine justice Dante is referring to is some external force acting upon them. But this would run counter to the rather more subtle psychological picture Dante is presenting. Yes, we are told that the infernal guardian Charon violently shepherds the damned and reminds them of what we had seen written on the gates of hell. He reminds them they need to abandon hope. But the divine justice of which Virgil points out to Dante as the primary motivating force of the newly damned comes from within. It is a form of self-knowledge whereby the damned seem to recognize the appropriateness of their current journey. It's faithfulness to the life they have chosen for themselves, preferring, as Turner puts it, their story instead of love's. Indeed, none of the sinners Dante will meet on his journey in the rest of the Inferno is actually found protesting against the divine justice of their present predicament. Many blame other human beings for their fate. Others are either directly or indirectly defiant towards God. But on close scrutiny, none of the sinners are presented as actually deeming their predicament unjust. One way of reading the journey through hell, then, is as a journey towards self-knowledge, an ever deeper plunge into the justice of the condemnation of the darker possibilities inherent in our being. those aspects of ourselves that are expressions of our isolated presumption to be self-sufficient and to live at the expense of others and of God. I realize that statements like this would require precisely closer scrutiny, and I would be happy to return to it in discussion. But in the interest of a vertical lectura, let us continue to move forward. And the next thing to note about Inferno 3, in the light of what has been said so far, is the first use in the Commedia of a formula that will become familiar. In challenging Karen to let them pass, Karen, the infernal guardian at this point in the journey, doesn't want to let Dante pass because he sees Dante has not yet died. But Virgil says, Caron, non ti crucciare, volsi così colà dove si puote ciò che si vuole, e più non dimandare. Once again, we would seem to be presented with an instance of the imposition of God's will over something external to it. And once again, the picture is, however, more complicated than this. First of all, because the reference is not to God, but to the Empyrean, the transcendent place of perfect freedom, where will coincides with power, and power, as we will see in Paradiso 3, coincides with love. What we have here is a first way in which our cantos this evening raise the question of verticality itself. For if Dante's journey, like hell itself, is seen to depend on love, or the Empyrean, which is not the Empyrean, which is nothing other than the perfect unfolding of love on which the universe depends, then we can also say that it depends on its point of arrival. Dante's journey depends on its point of arrival, on that to which Dante's vertical journey through hell, purgatory, and paradise is tending. So as Eliot might put it, its end is its beginning. And whilst instinctively we might feel that the primary thrust of Dante's journey is from and through earth to heaven, its even more fundamental thrust is from heaven to earth. Without divine love, there would be no journey. We find here a narrative analog to the mystery of creation. Any movement towards God is only possible as a manifestation of the love by which God brings and sustains into existence all that is and all that can move towards her. With all this in mind, let us turn to Purgatorio 3. In the first canto of the Purgatorio, through Virgil's words to Cato, we have been reminded that Dante's journey is indeed fundamentally about freedom. It's a journey towards freedom. Libertà va cercando che si cara, etc. As Purgatorio 3 makes clear, however, Dante now needs to negotiate anew what this might mean. He needs to learn how to travel anew in his new surroundings. And this is not initially an easy thing to do. Dante is terrified at seeing only one shadow on the ground before him, and thinks he has been abandoned by Virgil. This leads Virgil to explain that while not united with their earthly flesh, otherworldly souls do nonetheless inform and enliven an aerial body that allows the human person to continue to exist, even between death and the resurrection. How this is possible is a mystery, Virgil says, as impenetrable as that of the Trinity. But, Virgil specifies, though impenetrable, this is a mystery that human beings can enter into through the incarnation, or, as Virgil puts it, through the fact that Mary gave birth. Ora, se innanzi a me nulla s'ombra, non ti meravigliar più che dei cieli, che l'uno all'altro raggio non ingombra. A sofferir tormenti, caldi e geli, simili corpi la virtù dispone, che come fa non vuol che a noi si svegli. Matto è chi spera che nostra ragione possa trascorrere la infinita via che tiene una sostanza in tre persone. State contenti, umana gente, alquia, che, se potuto aveste vedere tutto, mestier non era parturir Maria. The fact that Dante, the poet Dante, has Virgil simply refer to Mary's giving birth while not referring to the name of her child, is significant. For it could be seen to suggest that the mystery of the Incarnation is not only vital for human beings to understand as relating specifically to the historical Jesus, but also as relating to every individual person, whose way to divinization, according to Dante, lies precisely in becoming Christ-like. And we'll return to this point shortly. At stake in Virgil's words to Dante about the embodiedness of otherworldly souls is also his own role as guide. After the lines just quoted, Virgil further reminds Dante that the mysteries he is speaking of transcend human reason. And this reminds us that, especially now that we're in purgatory, a realm that is new even for Virgil himself, Virgil is not the perfect guide. This, however, is not in itself a problem for the progress of our protagonists. It does, however, require a different mode of journey, one that is more collaborative, communal. And brief aside here, because this in turn raises a question concerning whether there might be something in it in the journey for Virgil too, whether he too will learn something, and whether this might somehow affect his relationship with the divine. Such question, however, would require vertical readings of quite a number of other canons. So I'll just leave it as an open question, but I think it is a question that is raised at this particular moment in Dante's text. So in Purgatorio 3, the dynamics of the journey changes first of all between Dante and Virgil themselves. Indeed, it is on Dante's initiative that the two begin to move in the right direction, after that Virgil had remained silent upon ending his speech concerning the limitations of human reason. Virgil remains eyes to the ground, and it is Dante who, looking up, points in the right direction. He addresses Virgil once again as Maestro, and encourages him to look up and ahead, where a group of penitents can be seen coming towards them. And this new encounter, in turn, broadens and deepens communal possibilities. But not without initial hesitation. On first seeing Dante and Virgil, the penitent, who we will find out later are those who have died under excommunication, huddle up against the mountain rock. And it is only upon Virgil's formal request for directions that they begin cautiously to move towards them. An action that is described in some of the most beautiful lines of the whole of the Commedia, I think. Come le pecorelle escon del chiuso, a una, due, a tre e l'altre stanno, tindette atterrando l'occhio e il muso, e ciò che fa la prima e l'altre fanno, addossandosi a lei, se la s'arresta, semplice e quete loro perché non sanno. Sì Dio muovere a venir la testa di quella mandria fortunata lotta, udica in faccia nell'andare onesta. But then, just afterwards, once again, they hesitate. Like Dante was taken aback at not seeing Virgil's shadow next to his, so the penitent are taken aback at seeing Dante in his mortal body. Virgil thus attempts to reassure them by pointing out, first, that yes, indeed, they should believe that this is a mortal body they see before them, and second, that Dante is able to be here in purgatory with his mortal body because his journey is guided by heavenly virtue. Senza vostra domanda io vi confesso che questo è corpo umano che voi vedete, perché il lume del sole in terra è fesso. Non vi maravigliate, ma credete che non senza virtù che dal ciel vegna cerchi di soverchiare questa parete. Let us pause here and reflect on both these claims in the light of what we have seen so far. And let's take the second of these claims first. For once again, it foregrounds the double verticality of Dante's journey. A journey of the earthly heavenwards that is only possible because of the prior journey earthwards of the heaven, prior not necessarily in a temporal sense. This time, however, the foregrounding of this double verticality resonates with Christological overtones. Virgil's words equate recognition of Dante's physical presence in purgatory to a confession of faith, which, coupled with the reference to heavenly virtue descending to earth, cannot but bring to mind, implicitly but strongly, the incarnation of the divine itself. The canto indeed continues to resonate Christologically. In response to Virgil's request, the penitent do indeed point Dante and Virgil in the right direction for beginning their ascent of the mountain. After this, one of the penitents seeks Dante's recognition, and when Dante tells him he is unable to recognize him, the response is like Christ's before Thomas. Manfred simply points to the wound on his chest. Quando io mi fu umilmente disdetto d'averlo visto mai, egli disse, or vedi, e mostrò una piaga a sommo il petto. Poi, sorridendo, disse, io sono Manfredi. So at the same time that we begin to see the journey towards God taking on a more communal nature, we are also invited to reflect on human identity and particularity in Christic terms. Instead of the application of self or the assertion of self that we found in Inferno 3, we find the beginning of the construction of self in, through, or as Christ. Or differently phrased, we find the beginning of the construction of self in, through, or as the physical embodiment of love. The story of Christ is, for Dante, the story of divine love made flesh. And it is as part of this story that any individual story might probably be told. And it is as part of the story of love that even the worst of sinners can hope to be at one with God, even beyond what Manfred refers to as the short-sightedness of the institutional church. Orribili furono i peccati miei, ma la bontà infinita sì gran braccia che prende ciò che si rivolge a lei. Per loro maledizione sì non si perde che non possa tornare l'eterno amore, mentre che la speranza affior del verde. But the journey ahead is still long. And what we have here in Purgatorio 3 is still clearly an imperfect and somewhat ironic Christ-likeness. Yet, the communal and Christological dimensions of Purgatorio 3 set the stage for a different kind of journey than that of the Inferno. In Purgatory, to move towards God is to recognize one's limitations as the foundation for interpersonal encounter, and to recognize that one's identity cannot be affirmed as self-standing or self-sufficient, but as nothing other than the embodied and ever-different particularization of a love we all share as the ground of our being. In this respect, it is important to note that the canto ends with a further broadening out of community. We are told that it is possible for the penitent in purgatory to make progress not only on their own efforts, but also through the prayers of human beings who are still on the other side of death. This exchange of love creates a communal continuum between this world, the other world, and God, which enriches the double verticality mentioned earlier. Our journey towards God is possible not only on account of its dependence on God, but also on account of what we can do for each other, on this side of death, on the other side of death, and across the divide between the two. It is in such communal perspective that, for Dante, individual human beings might find perfect freedom. Freedom, in this view, is seen not as the neutral capacity for choice possessed by the individual, a capacity of choice that is prior to any choice in particular, whether it be the choice of goodness or of evil. Freedom is seen, rather, as the capacity to orient one's being communally towards goodness. Such capacity is not prior to choice, but coincides with the choice of goodness. Failure to orient our being towards goodness is thus not a bad exercise of freedom, but a failure to be as free as we could be. A failure to partake in that transcendent reality in which what one wills perfectly coincides with what one can do. To reflect further on Dante's understanding of such transcendent reality, let us now turn to Paradiso 3, in which the kind of communal perspective which begins to be traced in Purgatorio 3 is explicitly defined as the essence of paradise. Once again, the canto begins with a mistake on Dante's part, a mistake that foregrounds his need to learn anew how to travel in his new surroundings. Dante sees a number of faint human figures and deems them a reflection. So as soon as he recognizes they're ready to speak to him, he turns around so as to see them face to face. He sees nothing, however, so turns in amazement to Beatrice, who is now Dante's guide instead of Virgil. Beatrice smiles at what she calls Dante's yet unsure footing in truth, benevolently referring to Dante's mistake as a childish thought. We had a wonderful discussion about this moment in the workshop earlier. Beatrice then urges Dante to speak to the blessed and, like Virgil had done to the penitent of Purgatorio 3, uses words that equate interpersonal encounter with a profession of faith. Non ti maravigliare perché io sorrida, mi disse, appresso il tuo ricordo, poi sopra il vero ancor lo pieno non fida, ma te rivolve come suole a vuoto. Vere sostanze sono ciò che tu vedi, qui rilegate per manco di voto. Però parla con esse e odi e credi, che la verace luce che le appaga da sé non lascia loro torcere i piedi. Particular interest here is the structure that is similar to that employed by Virgil. Virgil said, non vi maravigliate ma credete, about Dante's physical presence in hell, in purgatory, sorry. And here we find similar structure, extended, but similar structure. Non ti meravigliare, però parla con esse e odi e credi. I think it's important to note this structural similarity. What happens next can indeed be seen to deepen the perspectives opened up in Purgatorio 3. Indeed, the rest of Paradiso 3 is taken by Dante's conversation with Picarda, sister of one of Dante's dearest friends, Forese Donati, who Dante had met in Purgatorio 20. Picarda, like all the blessed Dante sees in the heaven of the moon, appears to him there on the lowest rung of Dante's cosmic journey towards the Empyrean, because she has failed to be faithful to the religious vows she had made in life. And this prompts Dante's apparently sensible question. Dimmi, voi che siete qui felici, desiderate voi più alto loco per più vedere e per più farvi amici? To which Picarda responds with words which have become some of the better known and loved of the Commedia. Frate, la nostra volontà quieta virtù di carità, che fa volerne sol quel c'avemo, e d'altro non ci asseta. Se desiassimo essere più superni, foran discordili i nostri visiri dal voler di colui che qui ne c'è, che vedrai non capere in questi giri, s'essere in carità e qui necesse, e se la sua natura ben rimiri. Anzi è formale resto beato esse, tenersi dentro alla divina voglia, per cuna farsi nostre voglie stesse. Sicché, come noi senti soglia in soglia, per questo regno, a tutto il regno piace, come all'orecchio in suo voler ne voglia. E in la sua volontà è nostra pace. Ed è quel mare al quale tutto si muove, ciò che la cria, o che natura pace. The answer Picarda gives to Dante's question concerning the hierarchical verticality of heaven, is that the blessed are perfectly happy, quite literally, in seeing just as much as is granted them to see by God. And this is necessarily the case because the essence of heavenly being is charity, whereby carità is meant the love by which the will of each blessed is perfectly at one with that of God and that of all the other blessed. With great poetic skill and philosophical precision, note for instance the rhyme on necesse and esse. Dante thus beautifully articulates, through Picarda of course, the dependence of human being on divine love. As Picarda explains, then, to be in perfect peace is not only to see God, but also to be at one with His will, in which everything that is has its being. And this means that to be in perfect peace is to be in charity, at one in love both with God and with all the other blessed. What baffles the pilgrim as regards hierarchical verticality is only baffling if due consideration is not given to the fact that to be in heaven is to be in charity and in conformity to the will of God, one because of the other. And to the fact that this implies, as the pilgrim finds out for himself at the end of his journey, that to see God is to be at one with the love which God is. In other words, the doubt Dante expresses to Piccarda comes from an error in theological perspective, as a result of which proper attention is not given to the fact that, as the love which is the ground of all existence, God is not simply that to which all that exists moves, as we're told in lines 86 and 87. He is also, as we're told both in lines 71 to 81 and 95, that in which human existence can find its most perfect expression, no matter where one abides in relation to God. So God is not some thing or being there for human beings to see. God is that truth in seeing which human beings recognize themselves to be existing as expressions of the love that grounds their being. And here we should also remember that, like all the rest of the blessed Dante will meet on his journey across the heavenly spheres towards the Empyrean, Piccarda does not abide in the heaven in which she appears to Dante, but in the Empyrean itself, beyond space and time. She might well be amongst those blessed who are furthest away from God, but she is so in a realm in which distance has no spatial or temporal substance, and in which perfection is ubiquitous. This is not specified as such in Paradiso 3. It will only be, Dante begins to spell this out in Paradiso 4. But it is already implied in Piccarda's words and in Dante's response to them. Chiaro mi fu allor come ogni dove in cielo e paradiso, e sì la grazia del sommo ben d'un modo non di piove. The significance of Piccarda's words for our purposes this evening lies in the way in which they allow us to continue reflecting on the question of divine will and of its relationship to the human journey towards God. For what Piccarda is saying is that the essence of heaven, of truth, is nothing other than the divine will itself, or love. There is ultimately no truth or reality outside of this. This love precedes space and time. It is in this truth that this reality it is in this truth and this reality that the truth and reality of human freedom and personhood is situated. The will in which all of the blessed are at one, then, is also the will guiding Dante's journey, which Virgil refers to in both Inferno 3 and Purgatorio 3. It is a will in which individual human willing is perfected, not undermined. There is no competition here. God is not another being whose will human beings have to follow at the expense of their own. The divine will is what human beings can recognize themselves to be when they truthfully respond to the love which is in them. Such divine potential can be fulfilled even in the light of severe shortcomings. We have seen that Dante thought this was possible for Manfred, and later on, in the Cantos of the Heaven of Venus, we will be told that in heaven, sin is no longer remembered as sin, but as part of the particular trajectory that brought the individual to God. Indeed, before entering heaven, Dante had told us that human beings are immersed in the two rivers of the earthly paradise, one which erases the memory of sin as sin, the other which enhances the memory of goodness. From this perspective, the stories that are told in the second half of Paradiso 3, which we don't have time to get into at present, about the stories of the lives of Piccarda and the Empress Constance, are not meant to be read simply as records of failure, but also of the way in which human failure is not ultimately an impediment on the journey towards divinization, but an integral part of what makes us the particular human beings that we are, and that can, on the basis of our particular identity, be divinized. The reference to the story of the Empress Constance, of course, also serves to enhance the sense of vertical relationship between Purgatorio 3 and Paradiso 3. Constance being Manfred's grandmother, emphasizing thus through the family tie a sense both of community and of historical particularity, but also contextualizing these within the deeper picture of the stories of Manfred's and Constance's relationship with God. So to phrase all this in terms of the question of verticality, what we see in Dante's encounter with Piccarda is that notions of verticality as hierarchy ultimately dissolve in our relationship with God. there is only the blissful and harmonious communal interplay of individual particularities. And this brings us to music. First of all, because it is with music that Dante's encounter with Piccarda ends. After speaking with Dante, Piccarda starts singing an Ave Maria, and in singing this, disappears from Dante's sight. It is, of course, extremely appropriate that it should be with an Ave Maria that the episode should end, for it is a prayer celebrating that particular exercise of human freedom, Mary's yes to the Incarnation, on which, according to Dante, the whole of salvation history depends. Così parlò e poi cominciò Ave Maria cantando e cantando regnò come per acqua cupa cosa grave. One of the most beautiful things to note about these lines is the enjambment between Ave and Maria, emphasizing rhythm and the physicality both of poetry and of song. But departing now from Dante's text, music might be appropriate for us this evening, also because it might give us fruitful tools for engaging non-verbally with the question of verticality. Take, for instance, something as simple as a C major chord. And I should say that my piano playing is only marginally better than my handstanding. So, all right. But take something as simple as a C major chord. Played sequentially, the three notes might give us a strong sense of vertical directionality. But when they are played together, the sense of vertical directionality dissolves through the harmonious fusion of the particularity of the three individual notes. So perhaps something as simple as a chord captures something of the essence of Piccarda's speech about the confluence of wills and of particularity. And if it does that, perhaps it can also help us think about the new practice of vertical reading that we are involved in. To what extent can three cantos read vertically across canticles resonate with each other? More broadly, to what extent can the three canticles themselves be seen to resonate with each other? What kind of harmony, if any, ultimately unites Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso? Leaving these as open questions, I would like to end by listening together to a piece of music that was constantly on my mind while preparing this evening's reading. Written at the end of the 19th century, this is not a piece or a kind of music that Dante could have had in mind when writing the Commedia, unless he saw it in God during the period. Neither is it a piece directly inspired by the Commedia. Its author did write a choral version of the Prayer to the Virgin of Paradiso 33, which is often performed together with the piece that I'm about to play. And the piece I'm about to play is itself an Ave Maria, the prayer sung by Piccarda on departing from Dante. But this is as far as the direct or semi-direct links between the music and Dante's text goes. So, the piece in question, the piece I'd like for us to listen together, is the Ave Maria by Giuseppe Verdi. It is collected as one of his quattro pezzi sacri, 4 sacred pieces, the others being a Te Deum, a Stabat Mater, and the Laudi alla Vergine, based on Paradiso 33. It is a striking piece that in fruitful ways can invite us to think about questions of freedom, particularity, harmony, and verticality. Verdi conceived of this Ave Maria as an enigmatic scale harmonized for unaccompanied mixed choir of 4 voices. It was composed after the Requiem and is usually performed together with the other of the 4 sacred pieces. It is a beautiful example of the composer's mature style and an expression of his renewed interest in the setting of the religious texts. The piece was written in response to the publication by music professor Aldo Crescentini in 1888 of an enigmatic scale, composed of unusual and strange intervals, which he challenged composers to harmonize. So if this is a regular C major scale, the musical challenge, the enigmatic scale, is the following. Verdi's response to the challenge is a piece divided into 4 sections, in each of which the enigmatic scale is sung, first ascending, then descending, by a different voice part, simply on the words Ave Maria, respectively basses, altos, tenors, and sopranos. The piece is about 5 minutes long. Each section, while contributing to a sophisticated overall unity, has its own distinctive character. 4 very different miniatures that share a splendid, subtle attention to the intimate interaction between the 4 voices. Why might it be relevant for us to listen to this piece together this evening? Well, there's the question of embodiment. Let's remember that. Then there's the challenge. Verdi does not compose the piece entirely on his own initiative. It is his way of responding to material already in existence. Then there is the double verticality, spontaneously integral in the nature of a musical scale that is played both ascending and descending. Then there is the fact that this natural kind of verticality is made strange by the enigmatic intervals of the scale, particular scale, which is the basis of this piece. To enjoy the piece, we need to be ready for our expectation to be undermined as to what a scale is or should be. Then there is the fact that this at once natural and strange verticality is taken as the basis for 4 very different musical moments, each distinctive in its own right, yet each acquiring its full meaning in its interaction with the others. Just as throughout the piece, each of the 4 voices finds its meaning in interacting with the other 3. Finally, there is the fact that in, through, and beyond all of these things, which we might or might not pick up directly when listening to the piece, there is the singular beauty of the piece as a whole, our experience of which transcends our appreciation of any individual aspect of it. I am not suggesting that Verdi's Ave Maria provides us with a direct analog to the reading of Dante's poem I have proposed this evening. I do feel, however, that it can resonate and help enhance our engagement with some of the central questions we have explored. Questions that deal with difference in identity and identity in difference, with vertical movements and vertical movements made strange, and with the bearing all this might have on our understanding of a religious text. I might also add, I would like to add that we could perhaps also see the challenge posed to Verdi by the enigmatic scale as parallel to Heather's and George's invitation for us to take this 4-year-long vertical journey through Dante's poem. A challenge to which each speaker will respond differently in the creation of a harmony we will be discovering over the next 4 years, with surprise, excitement, and suspense. Is that okay? And I should say that the music is the end of the... I won't be saying anything after the music itself.